any issues today, you can chat or email my colleague Adam. And if you could take a moment to rename yourself, mute yourself if you're not already. And if you're feeling like it, please turn on your video so we can see your face. Give everyone a minute to check their name and other settings. In addition to the Zoom chat and raise your hand feature, we will have an agenda item that makes use of Mentimeter, but we will walk you through that. If you haven't done it, it's pretty painless, but fun, a way to kind of enhance the conversation. But that will be towards the end of the agenda, and we will walk you through that. It is helpful to have another device handy, but not required, but we will go through all of that. All right, our good old consent and icebreaker. I will read the consent to everyone, and if you could, once I've read it, please type your name in the chat and the words "I agree." And because the bulk of today's agenda is about community engagement, we're hoping you can share a memorable community gathering, even better if it was a community meeting or community event, but want to get everyone in that spirit and thinking. So here I go. As a participant in this conversation, you are providing consent to the City of Chicago to use the recording in accordance with its mission. You also understand that the conversation will be part of a collection of Cortico's Local Voices Network, whose mission is to foster conversations in communities and in the media that improve our understanding of one another. Cortico will collect, retain, and analyze these conversations in keeping with that mission. Additionally, the recording of this meeting is subject to the Illinois Freedom of Information Act, and it would be released by the City of Chicago if requested by a member of the public. Finally, please be advised that a member of the nonprofit civic organization City Bureau is present at this meeting and will develop a documentation report for public posting on wewillchicago.com. Some of your comments may be directly quoted in the report, and a screenshot of this meeting may also be included in the report. These tools will ensure that we are promoting transparency throughout the We Will Chicago process. If you understand and agree to this, please type your name and the words "I agree" in the chat. Isabel, thanks for getting us going. Sharing a memorable community meeting. A World Cafe style one for the 48th Ward Master Plan. In a Blockbuster that's now a preschool. It's pretty cool. Community workshop for advanced directives for 100 people at a mosque. I love the diversity of these. Invest Southwest kickoffs in fall of 2019. I think not only were those great events, but to me, it was like the last time, it's like the last big gathering that I can remember. Those were great. Let's see what else people have put in the chat. Oh, Juan Sebastian was at the same one as Isabel. Saturday morning meetings with residents in Washington Park's Fieldhouse. Thanks, Todd. Roberto, 500 people voting plus, 500 plus people voting for a 100 units of affordable housing in Logan Square. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. You never know how these are going to go over, but I feel like so fresh Saturdays. Yep. Everyone is game and in the right spirit for talking about engagement today. So today, as we send around, there are a few updates we want to share, and then we will have a couple of presentations. I guess the presentations are half update and half new information, letting you know what's been going on with community partners and artist organizer engagement. And then a preview of what we're thinking for phase 3, where we really need your help in refining the broadest engagement to date for We Will Chicago. That's what we want to pick your brains about and have discussion about today. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk about what happened with your input on the draft objectives that were shared during our last meeting.
All right, well, welcome to the last meeting of 2021. Before everyone starts, well, maybe you already have, thinking about just the holidays and the end of the year. So we have fairly much finished with the objectives. So you all saw the objectives when they were in draft form or when they were being worked on. Those have been your input, both very specific feedback for each pillar, and then anything that was cross-cutting in general was presented to the research teams, and they have considered that as they finished just this last week, looking at the objectives and incorporating that information. So all of that has been considered. All of those meetings have been held. Actually, I think this is the last meeting for the Will of the year. There are no more research meetings. So right now, the team will be then taking all that information. There's a lot of it that's going to need to be synthesized. And we're going to need to make it more accessible to the public. You know, we as a group have done a lot of words, you know, just really working on these, a lot of wordsmithing. But we'll be looking at refining the objectives. They've got to be shortened, so you have to keep them short. You can't have these double sentences or basically 2 objectives in one. Focusing on the essential elements, the actions, the outcomes, and making sure they are there sound. Do you hear me? Do you have a problem hearing me? Roberto's saying there's some sound issues. And making sure
might just be your mic, Kathy, gets a little wispy, I think, sometimes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll be quick.
I think that's better.
That's better.
Is that better? Okay, I think I'm having, yeah. Sorry. And making sure the objectives relate to the guiding question. So that is finished. We'll be refining those, as I said. And the next year, we'll start looking at the policy discussions. It might be my turtleneck. Thank you. So next year, we really are going to start looking, you know, we'll come back with those short objectives. So of course, everyone will want to see how those were refined. And then we'll start policy discussion. So a lot of work to do next year. And as Courtney said, we're going to be talking about how we want to get these shortened, publicly accessible objectives and other policies out to the public. And that will be most of the discussion today. You can go to the next slide. I think we turn that over to Skylar.
Hi, good morning. And I'll kick it over to Juan Sebastian to get us going.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So as Courtney mentioned at the top of the meeting, the big focus for today's advisory committee session is on community engagement. And so Skylar and I are gonna spend a little time in the next 30 minutes or so sharing some data, a snapshot of what engagement has looked like to date in this phase that we're in. But before going into that, we wanted to start with a bit of an opener and hear from all of you just to help ground us in the collective wisdom of this group. What does accessible and meaningful community engagement look like to you? And I think we'll welcome any thoughts or responses in the chat. If anyone wants to come off of, or if a few people want to come off of mute, we would appreciate that too. All right, I see multiple languages. Maureen, dropping that in the chat. Jargon free. I think both of those are very important for the accessible part as well, for making the engagement accessible or digestible. Many different ways people can plug in and participate, listening, and very importantly, that the people most impacted have the strongest voice. Thank you, Ellen, for that too. Does anyone want to say a little bit more about what they're typing into the chat? Or does anyone else want to verbalize anything?
I mean, I think when you are trying to do, community engagement, always like everything that everyone has said, right? Looking at multiple ways of engagement, right? Because, like, for example, sometimes you're trying to get an answer to a survey, but there are many people that are not able to open the survey online, or they don't have the technical capacity to participate in that way. So again, you print the survey, you go to the places where people gather. In Little Village, for example, it to us has been extremely important to use the schools as community hubs, also because of immigration status, right? Like, schools are natural places where parents, regardless of their immigration status, have to be present, right? So that's why right now there's a big problem with the policy of that is not allowing undocumented parents to access the school building. So we're working on that. But because, again, we have been so successful in using schools as community hubs, in multiple tools, right? Multiple tools for engagement, whether that's community meetings that are like town hall style cafecitos at people's homes, and small like one-on-ones, focus groups at different places. Yeah, location and time, you're so right. It's essential to be able to access everybody.
Thank you, Katya. And I think I see other people sharing thoughts that align with a lot of what you said too. The multiple ways of engaging, or multiple ways for people to give feedback, and meeting people where they are. Let's see, I also see on-site childcare and multiple ways of getting feedback again. Meaningful and clear outcomes. Some sense that community input will be used thoughtfully for next steps. Clear goals, co-designed with community and compensated. Childcare, yeah, another mention of childcare. And thank you, Roberto. We will also be looking at a spectrum in just on the next slide. But the elevated Chicago principles, I think we found really useful too, as a grounding principles for shaping community engagement. Does anyone else want to say a little bit more, or just talk through or verbalize before we move on to the next part of to more of the presentation?
Hi, this is Rachel. I'm happy to jump in. I'm pretty sure about to make sure that the Saint has physical action, that the physical space is accessible. There are accessible restrooms, includes to transportation, different modes of transportation, and that we also want to make sure that communication access is built in, the meet a variety of different communication access needs.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I think that one layer that we've also been having to navigate too has been we've had some in-person community engagement events, but it's been mostly a virtual engagement so far. And so that's definitely something we've been having to adapt and make sure that there's accessibility baked in throughout too. Isabel, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that too, about this COVID time, wondering if anyone in the group has participated in a particularly meaningful community engagement during COVID, because I think that's a big challenge for this, and something that we've been thinking about a lot, how to overcome that. I don't know if anybody has any good examples of really meaningful community engagement that they've done virtually.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for the group.
I would offer, and hi Isabel and everybody, I would offer as an example, one that several people that are in this call participated in, which was, they were not exactly community meetings, but they were very diverse workshops where 80+ people showed up to develop what's now the equitable transit-oriented development plan for the city this past summer. And they were co-created with the mayor's office. And I would say when we looked at the response and the satisfaction of the participants, people had a good time, people contributed meaningfully. And I think it was a mix of things that came together to create a space. It was very challenging because again, 80 people on a Zoom call in the summer, in the middle of a pandemic, was not the most ideal of environments, but I would say it helped having art embedded throughout. It helped a lot, including a lot of interesting electronic tools for people to interact physically, especially those who are not comfortable talking in the meeting. And it helped having a good team behind, kind of making sure that things kept moving forward, that the chat room was lively, that there were icebreakers, that there were breakout sessions that were well facilitated. I don't know. I would say that one, that couple of meetings for me were really, really meaningful. And we've been using some of the tips for future conversations in Zoom.
Good morning, everyone. I would add to that the virtual engagements that I've been a part of that have been really, I guess, impactful and things that people have really bought into is when you're able to draw the line of what their participation is to the actual impact that they could have. So thinking about budget, Invest Southwest and things like that, saying that these are the ways that your input can help mold this, and this is how it's going to show up on streets near you or in different interests that you have, like making those things as clear as possible for folks. And that also helps kind of with accountability down the line, eliminating some of the, I guess, expectations that aren't realistic. Sometimes when folks participate in these things, it's this grand view of, hey, this is the city, but a lot of times these engagements are a lot more targeted. So letting folks know just what and where that is.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Travis, and thanks, Roberto. And I saw some other good examples mentioned in the chat of Together We Heal, or even the recent equity impact assessment workshop that we held as a part of the ETOD work as well. And Roberto, I agree. I feel like the practice of starting off with some artistic or cultural opening in a lot of those ETOD working group meetings, I think has really been meaningful and helps people plug in or tune in a way that's a little challenging, I think, can be challenging virtually. Great, so this has been really generative and really, I think, helpful in a good level setting for the conversation we want to have for the rest of the time. So I think we'll move on to the next slide and move into some of the presentation we have planned. Just before going into some of the data that we have on our current community engagement activities and efforts for We Will Chicago, wanted to also start with this level set also with this framework, the spectrum of public participation, which Elevate Chicago also adapted or built off of the International Association for Public Participation. And I'm not gonna read this all through. I think we're gonna, we might be able to drop a link in the chat, but wanted to just take into account the spectrum of engagement here that is shown both from, or starting from maybe lighter touch, just informing, which has different goals, then going down through consulting, involving, collaborating, empowering, and ultimately owning, where the promise to the public at the top end of this spectrum being we will keep you informed, and then the bottom, the promise of the public at the bottom part of the spectrum being we will provide or transfer full or partial ownership of this project to you. So we just want to share this as a framework for us to keep in mind as we look back at our activities to date, but also think about what community engagement can look like in phase 3 of We Will Chicago, which is what we anticipate will be the broadest or biggest public engagement part of the process. So if we actually go to the next slide, we also just wanted to be able to visually capture and show for you all how engagement has been evolving or been a part of the different phases so far and future phases of We Will Chicago. So as I know we've shared in the past, in phase 1, which was over 2020, we primarily had 2 forms of engagement. One being a set of community conversations that were really targeted towards defining the 7 pillars themselves, and also the principles that have become the guiding principles for We Will Chicago, as well as the partnership with MPC, who hosted workshops with peer cities, with public or city staff, with civic organizations, with community-based organizations, which helped establish the 5 themes that we're building on, of which meaningful and accessible community engagement is one. Now we're in phase 2, which has been throughout this year and going through next June. And the channels of engagement that we have right now in phase 2 are the research teams and advisory committee, which are the deepest form of engagement that we have so far. As you all know, as you all applied, went through the open application process to be a part of this advisory committee. That's also what we do with the research teams. And in a lot of instances, there are residents or people who are not affiliated with organizations that are sitting on these teams currently, drafting these objectives, drafting guiding questions, working on recommendations too. So we see this as really one of our core, deepest forms of engagement currently in the process. In addition to that, we have our community partner engagement events, 25 community partners, I believe, who receive funding to host events about We Will. Same with artist organizer engagement events, which I know we've been sharing a bit about too. And then also more recently launching this Meeting in a Box pilot in partnership with MPC, and then also doing broad-based surveys through the We Will Chicago website. Future, in the next phase of this, so starting next summer and going through the end of 2022, we are currently envisioning that there will be additional community partner events. We are in the process right now, and this is why I wanted to have the conversation with you all today, of scoping broader public engagement. And we have some ideas of what that could look like, but really want to generate more ideas from you or hear from you what we should be doing. But that can include field team tabling at existing events, larger town halls, more focus groups targeted towards communities or populations where we've identified some gaps, and extension or Meeting in a Box the efforts as well. And that's in addition to any other virtual surveys that we'll conduct, as well as a larger public comment period on the draft policy plans that the research teams are currently building out. And then, of course, any ideas that you all have or can contribute to this too, and help us shape this to be meaningful and accessible as is our goal. So if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to start mapping out our current engagement activities across this spectrum. I think we've talked about all these now, but these range from at the inform. Sorry, if we go back just for a quick second. They range from the at the inform phase, some billboards, or I guess maybe the timer is doing something with the slide, but more like PSA type, informing residents of Chicago that this planning process is going on. Next, at the next level down, we have, I believe we had listed some of our community partner events. And actually, I think I can pull this slide up on my desktop too, to just remind myself. 1 second. Cool. So then at the next, at the consult level, we envision the public comment period at the end of phase 2, meeting that or operating at that part of the spectrum. And then at involve and collaborate, we see the community partner events, the artist organizer events, the Meeting in a Box events, all being part of it. Involve. as well as the We Will Chicago surveys online. And then the pillar research teams and advisory committee, I think we see fitting between involve and collaborate. And then ultimately, we want the implementation structure for We Will Chicago to be at the deepest level here of the spectrum, which is owning. So that's just a little bit of how we're mapping out or thinking about our different engagement channels along this spectrum. And then if we go to the next slide, we can move into some more numbers and updates on the quantity and whatever we do know about the quality of our engagement so far. So I'll just talk through these a little quickly. As you all know, the research teams and advisory committee, they're comprised of 115 different volunteers from across the city, 25 community partners, which are funded to be part of the research teams and to host events. And each team has been has met so far for seven meetings. The artist organizer events, we have 7 artist organizer pairs that we're working across the city, focused on different pillars, and 1 mobile team. Those teams have hosted 79 events to date, and we estimate about 1,400 participants across those different events, which they do vary, and we'll say a little bit more about what those look like. On the community partner side, again, we have 25 community partners. So far to date, there have been 29 events held and 20 upcoming. Through the recent survey that we had online, we had 464 responses. And then with the Meeting in a Box tool, which we're piloting right now, we had 116 individuals attend a training to be able to host a meeting through using the Meeting in a Box tool. And then 22 organizations or individuals so far have indicated to MPC that they plan to host an event. So this is a snapshot, and I'm gonna pass it over to Skylar to go into some more details and some of the numbers behind this.
Hey, thank you so much, Juan Sebastian, and good morning again, everyone. I'll double click a little bit on the who and how related to the many tactics that Juan Sebastian just shared. We know this is a lot of information, so we'll definitely send out these slides afterwards so you can absorb the content even further. So this slide shows you the geographic breakdown, as well as some of the self-reported ethnicity, race, and gender identity questions for all of the volunteers that were selected for both the research teams and the advisory committee. So you see, you can see here for yourself, strong cross-section across the entire city of Chicago, which we were very excited about, though there is some, stronger representation in some neighborhoods over others. I think compared to the general population of the city of Chicago, I believe as of the last census, and we know there's underreporting in this, that the Latinx population of Chicago is closer to 30%. So for the total number of people that applied to volunteer in this way through the process, we know that we're underrepresented in the Latinx identity. I'll also, Ms. Reed, did you have a comment?
No.
And I'll also note that we are very strongly represented in those that identify as women through the volunteer process, and definitely underrepresented in those that may identify as non-binary as through our volunteer engagements as well. Our next slide. All right, so this shows you the where of the community partners and the artist organizers. So we did map the 25 community partners. Many of them have been doing their engagements virtually, but many of them do represent sort of specific geographically targeted community areas. And so when in the process of those organizations applying, they self-reported where their service areas are. Some of them are definitely citywide, but others did identify specific geographic areas. So that is what you see mapped on the right, as well as the geographies for the artist organizer pairs. So Honeypot Performance Collective was very intentional in, as they were selecting artists, thinking about the geographies in which the artist organizers had relationships with on the ground other organizations and other artists, in order to make sure that in the short duration of 4 months in which they were doing their engagement, they'd be able to hit the ground running, leveraging those existing networks. Many of those artist organizers were situated and doing work on the south and west side or the very far northwest side of Chicago. Each of the artist organizer pairs had an assigned geographic hub of 3 neighborhoods. So if we think of, one economic development team, they were working in 3 neighborhoods. The environment, climate and energy was working at 3 neighborhoods. So, one learning from this phase is, not every single neighborhood has been engaged in all pillars of the plan so far, but many neighborhoods have been engaged in some conversation related to either a single pillar of the plan or the plan more broadly, if the community partner wasn't only talking about their one issue of focus, but about the citywide plan overall. And I will just share, we have a artist organizer team that is a mobile team. They probably met with the most number of people throughout the whole process because they were doing a lot of tabling over the course of the summer at various events throughout the city, and as well as, very large scale sort of neighborhood level Taste of Chicago type events, as well as some smaller scale sort of farmers markets and communities too. So that gives you a sense of where much of that engagement has happened. And you can note on the right side with your own eyes where some of the gaps may be in terms of the areas in darker red being those where we had stronger representations of teams doing engagement, and those in the gap area, particularly in the loop area and then the nearer north side. So I think that would be closer to the areas of Lincoln Park there on the north side. We do have some gaps in neighborhoods, and particularly on the very, very far northwest side of the city and the very far west side of the city as well. Next map here, or next slide. All right, this gives you a bit of a deep dive into the community partner events. So again, community partners, funded organizations that applied through our open application process. The logic for both the integrations with the community partners and the artist organizers is really leaning into the learning from phase 1 of, we know that the folks that will be the most powerful in engaging their communities and conversations about the plan and, breaking down barriers of trust between the city and communities are those that are trusted and have deep relationships already. And so we see artist organizers and community partners doing just that. Community partners, through their relationship, not only are they engaged, and some of you are community partners through the advisory committee or through the research teams, but they're also expected in the course of the partnership to host 2 events between this fall up until February of next year. And then as we continue the next phase of engagement into next summer, they'll be expected to host 2 more events at that period as well. So just thinking about this current phase of engagement events for the community partners, 30 events so far have been held, with 25 upcoming up until March of next year. Community partners range, and we have in the full deck that we'll send you after this meeting, it's organizations such as Black Roots Alliance, the Bronzeville Community Development Partnership, Coalition for Better Chinese American Community, as well as the Rogers Park Business Alliance. So a lot of organizations that, range in size and scale. They range in neighborhood focus. They range in the issues that they care about and are working on. So we're really excited for the ways in which these partners are bringing the depth of their rich, diverse communities and interests to their perspective on the plan. The event location, so, Isabel had noted this, 71% have still been online and virtual, though some community partners have opted to do hybrid events or just fully in-person events because they deem them more accessible and approachable for their specific communities in which they're working. Most of the events have been in English only, but some partners have done bilingual events in English, Spanish, English, Chinese, and then we have had some Spanish only events as well. Next slide. All right, so a little bit more about artist organizer engagements. So as Juan Sebastian noted, there has been 79 virtual and in-person events completed through the artist organizer teams who are just wrapping up their phase of the work just this month. The artist organizers self-reported attendance of an estimated 1,400 participants. And as a part of the artist organizer team, the artist organizers were completing field note data at the end of each of the event for the artist organizer pair to capture some learnings of, this is what we heard, this is what we saw, this is what was successful about the event, this is what was a challenge. Here are some of the major sort of ideas or themes that emerged from the course of the conversations that we held or the activities that we created. Here are some of the wild ideas, some of the creative ideas that emerged in this conversation that we don't want to lose sight of as well. And here are some of the concerns that were voiced about, We Will Chicago, or about, specific communities that we want to make sure are reflected in this engagement too. As part of the artist organizer events, we also encourage the artists to encourage their invitees or their participants to complete exit surveys. So this was for a very critical reason of making sure that we are tracking information about who we are engaging and the quality of those engagements. I will note, and there's a couple slides from now on this, we had varying degrees of success related to exit survey completion. So it's something that we'd love to brainstorm around in some course of this conversation or offline for those of you that have a deeper background in how you can do that successfully, because we know how important exit survey data is to be able to track our success or lack thereof over time. The mobile artist team, again, they were doing events throughout the city. So to just echo that, while the artist organizers weren't touching every neighborhood of the city, the mobile artist team really helped us expand that reach. And you can see the breakdown of events by pillar down below in this graph. There were some artist organizer pairs that really dove into a small number of events and making them really meaningful, having all of their focus, energy, and attention on just a smaller subset. And then there were others to the extreme of, public health and safety hosting 17 events that maybe did a different tactic, where they went to a number of different tabling events in the community, and they considered those as part of the events as well. A number of the artist organizers, even outside of these formal events, were also doing sort of focus grouping, private one-on-one conversations with community leaders to be able to inform some of their findings in the community engagement too. And the next slide gives you a sense of what actually the artist organizer events were like. I think Chicago is very unique in having led with artist organizer engagement from the get-go, and giving the artists a lot of creativity in the type of ways in which they were engaging communities around the citywide plan. So to give you an example of that, we had, for the first one, the one on the left-hand side, environment, climate, and energy, they hosted an event which was a walking event, and where they engaged with communities around what it looks like to build a healing map. They had a walking tour of neighborhood architecture, and they talked throughout the course of the walking tour around discussing constructing sustainable homes and sustainable living. We had a photo voice exhibit where the public health and safety and neighborhood pillars collaborated on an event to showcase some two great photographic artists for an outdoor exhibit. The transportation team hosted a mobility and care event at the First Church of the Brethren in Garfield Park, which was really interactive. It was in a community garden space, super beautiful. It was a presentation of many of the youth ideas that they had gathered over the course of the summer, where they had engaged with a smaller group of about 5 to 6 young people who took photos of elements in their community that they thought needed better planning, and talked about what a different neighborhood should look like for their future that they would be excited to live in. They also created a zine that was a really approachable way of enabling residents to think about what planning means and how they might, as residents, shape the process of planning. And lastly, another example within the arts and culture pillar, they hosted conversations around to showcase stories of resilience and affirmations of protections and safety while planting seeds. So as you can tell, super non-traditional, not the ways in which, maybe DPD always plans and convenes our meetings in the planning sphere. So we really were excited about the ways in which we were able to maybe, move more audiences to think about the planning because of the different kinds of accessibility that these events helped create for us. The next slide shows the data on the quality of the engagements. And I'll just note, this is definitely an area of growth for us. So we only had 46 of the reported attendees from the artist organizer of 1,400 attendees. Only 46 then took that added step and immediately filled out either a paper or an online with a QR code that you could scan and have on your cell phone, an exit survey, right? So of the folks that did submit the exit survey, we have some age, race, and ethnicity demographics down here. And generally those that, filled out the survey had high rates of satisfaction related to questions around the quality of the event and willingness to participate in future events. Although we recognize that there could be a strong sampling bias here because those that are likely to fill out an exit survey may be more willing to positively report on some of these pieces. And so as we move forward into the future stages, we know that we want an exit survey methodology to be strong because it'll be able to show us even more detail about who we're engaging related to intersecting identities and who we might be missing to be able to drive new engagement solutions into next year. And with that, I'll kick it over to Gabby to round us out.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gabriela Jurasek, and I am the Assistant Commissioner of Community and Digital Engagement with DPD. I just started back in February of 2021, so still pretty new to government work. Prior to that, I worked for Goodman Theater as the Director of Digital Strategy. So today, we wanted to just kind of do a quick recap of what we've seen so far in the surveys. And a lot of these surveys, we really had the great support of the public information officers within all of the city departments. Also, a number of our community partners who helped us really push out these surveys to a much larger population than I think DPD would have been able to access alone. So as you can see, we had a total of 464 responses. I believe this survey was open for about a 3-week period. And these were all available on the We Will Chicago website. Just to note, these surveys were open-ended response questions. So we are still doing kind of a qualitative data analysis of all of the stuff that's coming in. It's obviously a much more manual process because, we have groups of people who are helping us read through the responses, kind of add, what topics did people bring up in these surveys, that kind of thing. What was the input that they were giving us specifically? So there's a lot more work right now that's going into that. But we were, as part of the survey, we did ask for zip codes. So this was self-reported. It was not required to complete the survey, but out of all of the responses we got, we were able to map about 336 of them. And you can see the distribution on the map on the right-hand side of where most of these responses were coming in. So, we know that there are definitely gaps. And as we were kind of discussing a little bit earlier, for next year, we want to try to push some of these surveys at more in-person events that may, happen next summer, as well as, have possible kind of street teams out there who would hopefully have tablets where we can kind of get information from people who don't necessarily have access to the internet from home or in the workplace. So one of the things that we're kind of doing in the short term during this process is reviewing the data kind of broadly, and we're going to be releasing a series of kind of point of view opinions of some of the surveys results and a little bit of a broader analysis, just saying like, hey, here's some interesting stuff that we're hearing before we can get kind of a really deep dive on all the specific data stuff. So that's kind of where we are right now. Do we want to go to the next slide? So as I was saying right before this, we do realize that we need kind of a broader engagement throughout Chicago. We do have some underrepresented kind of specific geographic areas that we want to tap into. So we know that we have gaps right now within the Northwest, Southwest, and far North sides. For the survey results, we have gaps from the far South side and the Southwest sides, and then lower responses for some specific topic areas. we were really blown away by the response we got from the transportation and infrastructure pillar. And, I think the smallest number of responses was for lifelong learning. So there was kind of like a very large range between them. So, I think it's going to be a little bit more work for us to kind of reach out to some of these, kind of interest groups to get a little bit more interaction with them. Also, as I think Skylar kind of was mentioning earlier, out of the community partners and artist groups, we also have a little bit of some geographic coverage that we want to reach out to, as well as actually the center downtown area is another area that has a little bit less representation. And we're actually going to be partnering with our central region team here at DPD to kind of do some more focused work on that area as well, because they're obviously very connected to kind of business communities that are, centered downtown. So other types of kind of identities and groups that we would like to seek out more are faith-based communities, also social service and violence prevention organizations, LGBTQIA communities, seniors and other residents without internet access, excuse me, youth for sure. We want to do a much larger push to kind of get the under 18 kind of response, within this plan as well. Specifically also people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, returning residents, immigrants and refugee communities, specific private sector industry representation, philanthropy, as well as other parts of government as well. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. And I think if you go to the next slide. So at this kind of juncture, we're really starting to get kind of a bit more meat on the bones of what we can have people respond to. We've gone through the phase so far where we created kind of guiding questions. And right now, all of the teams are working on these specific objectives. So what we did was we decided to kind of partner with Blue Daring and Melissa's team at Blue Daring to help us really beef up our communications and engagement strategy. Right now I am the sole engagement person within DPD. So obviously an effort this large for We Will Chicago needs a lot more people power to make it happen. So Melissa is going to kind of take you through a communications and engagement strategy plan that we've started working on internally that really is going to help lead us into 2022 on a strong footing.
Super, good morning. Can you all hear me well? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Gabby, and good morning, everyone. As Gabby said, purpose of these slides is to share with you both the strategic objectives that are driving what we're doing around communications and engagement, and then conversely, what are the tactics that we're employing from now through the end of the year in order to achieve those objectives. And at the end of the day, I'm going to certainly point to slides. You see some text here before you as well. The whole purpose of what we're going to go through is to make sure that we drive meaningful engagement, which has been the topic of our conversation this morning. And so key to doing that is making sure that everybody is informed around We Will Chicago, understands what it is, its potential, and then conversely that we reach people where they are, not only to inform them, but also to keep them engaged throughout the process. So over the last, I want to say maybe 8 weeks approximately, we've been thinking about what are these goals that we want to achieve from a communication standpoint. And all of these have been informed not only through conversation, but the spirit of the plan itself, which is all about inclusion and engagement and equity. And so first objective that we have is that no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter your education level, your background, et cetera, that you know what We Will Chicago is. I think that's very important. And throughout the course of our conversation this morning, we've talked about what that means, making language very accessible. I always like, pressure test the idea. If I told my mom about We Will Chicago, if I explained it to her, would she get it? And by the way, my mom's Dominican, an immigrant, et cetera, a hairdresser. And so can we ensure that every single person understands? That means the use of multiple languages, use of Braille, and obviously the points of distribution that we employ to share information. The second thing, needless to say, is drive that participation that we know is so critical to make this an inclusive process. So be it asking people to answer a survey, to answer some questions, to provide some input, to drive volunteers in a certain area as we discussed. We want to make sure that whatever the communication standpoint is supporting that. The other thing too, and it's a little bit of a complement to this first objective, is one thing is knowing what We Will Chicago is, this plan so that we have this shared future, more inclusive, resilient city, et cetera. But like, what is public planning? And I think that's a concept that maybe to us all on the phone, we know we've been working together on this, but it's not accessible to most. And so wherever we can, taking every opportunity to take ideas that are maybe complex or a little inaccessible and make them accessible, make them understandable. Because as we know, making information not accessible and not understandable could be exclusionary. We want to make sure that, we certainly make this inclusive. A fourth objective, and kind of in the spirit to, what Gabby had talked about, we had pointed out a little bit earlier in terms of meeting in the box and things like that, is, there's so many wonderful partners and teams and folks involved in this planning process, but as best we can, we want to spark conversations even outside of the collaborators involved, outside of our own domain. So it's almost this exponential effect. So we have the city talking about We Will Chicago and what it will do for us. And then the other thing is to equip public and private collaborators with the tools to share and engage. We have so many great organizations involved, so many great people involved, and it's very important that we don't take for granted the idea that all of us involved, all of the partners, all of the collaborators have what they need to share information with their constituencies, that they're equipped with those tools, with those assets, with those message points, whatever it is that they need, they're equipped to share. And then finally, broadly, just from a communication standpoint, we want, I dare say, position the city as a city who puts equity and inclusion at the forefront. And I think that happens through actions, through the way that we're going about this, through minding inclusion, minding engagement at every step of the process. So those are our objectives from a communication standpoint. And then now I'm going to dive into a series of tactics. And before I go into the specific tactics, there's like a framework by which we're looking at this. And it's very akin to the phases that we just covered in our previous slides, which is, before we go out there and spread the word and drive engagement, we're doing that. I think now is a perfect moment to align, systematize, and equip. And what that means is ensuring that the message that we have is cohesive, is succinct, and as I said in my earlier comments, that every actor in this process is empowered with the tools to spread the word. And it's almost just like, hey, let's level set, let's ensure that what we have is clear, is communicable, let's ensure that we have all the tools that we have to share so that when we go out and we amplify all the work that we're doing, we continue to do the work that we're doing, that we're all spreading a cohesive and accessible message. The second set of tactics is around this idea of making planning accessible. We can have events, and we're going to continue to having events, but if people don't know what planning is or what We Will Chicago is, that kind of makes it difficult. And so I would say going into like the earlier part of the year, the focus is on creating general and basic awareness of the plan so people know what it is and that it's happening. And furthermore, to one of Gabby's points a little bit earlier, ensuring that all of those communities, be it geographic or identity-based communities, that we have channels in place to reach every Chicagoan, right? Again, in the spirit of this framework, in the spirit of establishing a foundation so that we are inclusive and accessible in our communications. And then finally, kind of third set, actually there's a fourth step, but I'll say third anyway at this moment, is just that building broad awareness. And that's really where we want to have conversation today around and get your input on some ideas that we have to get out there to create broader awareness, to drive engagement in particular and participation. And that's where we will rely on more wholesale methods of reaching people. to create momentum, get engagement, and just get people positive about the process. And then there's like this is like the pseudo fourth category that I alluded to a little earlier, which is just some big ideas that we want to share, some big creative ideas on how we can not only achieve all these objectives, but one thing that we've talked about and I reflect upon regularly is that we are in our communications efforts, in our engagement, supporting this process, driving that participation. But We Will Chicago will be with us forever. It's our plan that we're going to collaboratively work to execute, for a long time. And so, what are ways that we can ingratiate, concretize this idea in a way that is sustainable, that stays with us, for a long time, like I said. So diving straight into the tactics, the first phase is just, this is what we're doing currently, which is aligning, systematizing, and equipping. So first thing, we have a promotional toolkit online, which provides our partners, our community partners, folks involved in the planning process, tools that they need to spread the word. That needs to be enhanced and enriched, based on many other things that we talked about, from multiple languages to reaching people across channels. And so we're investing energy in enriching that, enhancing it with a variety of collateral, with photography, with social media assets, with messaging, so that we really have everything that we need to spread the word. And just kind of expanding on that, creating a one-pager and some PowerPoint slides, so that our community partners, city departments can easily, even in Invest Southwest public meetings, that we can easily insert these, content around We Will Chicago. And mind you, it's not like we don't have materials now. We do have materials, but it's just taking what we have, synthesizing it, and putting it in different media so that it can be distributed, broadly. The other thing we're doing is creating a messaging guide, and there is a lot of language that we have currently, but we're working on collecting all of that language, synthesizing it, putting it into one place, and looking for every opportunity to simplify it, as well as create a glossary so that we have kind of easily definable terms and there's just clarity around all the language that we're using. Another thing is developing an explainer video, something friendly, something animated, something visual, that we cannot use only in and of itself, like as like this piece, but also like use in a modular way where we might use it across social media. We might use it as a reel, just again to let people know what We Will Chicago is in a friendly visual way. I think something really important too, like looking at this phone call, being part of other meetings through the planning process, there are so many diverse people at the table. And I think it's important that we show that like when people go to the We Will Chicago website, they see everyone's faces. So this is a small little thing, but looking for opportunities to enhance our website and our materials with pictures of all the people in the process. So it's clear without you even reading that this is something that we are doing together. And then also, again, in the spirit of the simplification, looking at all the visuals that we have, because we have so many charts of phases and steps and teams and all that kind of stuff, but looking for opportunities to simplify those so that we can share them more broadly with the public. Also in this phase, in the spirit of reaching everyone, we're looking to create a centralized stakeholder distribution list. So again, when we think, hey, we need more volunteers in the central area, we quickly have a list of organizations and partners that we can use as trusted messengers for sharing these engagement opportunities. But something that captures every single kind of dimension, like I said, from identity-based to geographic, to make sure that we really can share the message with everyone. Once we have all those assets developed, relaunch this toolkit that we have online, conduct training for all of the community partners involved so that everybody's equipped to use these tools, that they understand that they're there. And then another kind of small detail in the development of these materials, and it's like a little bit like an orange among a basket of apples, making sure that in all of the materials that we create, we have a little "we are here" indicator so that people see that we're going towards somewhere. Like if you're at a meeting and you're invited to participate or add some thoughts, that that this is part of our journey to get to the next phase. And I think that's very important to create this spirit of momentum, and we're going somewhere together. I haven't been looking at the chat, so I was gonna pause for thoughts, but maybe I'll go through it and then pause at the end. So first phase, like I said, just make sure all of our ducks are in order, our messages are simple so that we can share successfully and accessibly. The second phase of communications is earlier part of next year, January through June, is just level setting, like making sure that the idea of planning is accessible, that people understand We Will Chicago. And in that spirit, it's using the city's digital network, our physical assets, our partners, social media channels to launch an educational campaign. Again, this is supporting the planning process, supporting engagement so that people understand what We Will Chicago is. And we can talk about, basic definitions. What are the pillars? What are the guiding themes? What is equity? What is this historical reckoning and why it's so important? Also at this phase, and this is something we talked about earlier, is making sure that you reach people where they are. Because one thing is the digital piece, and that's nice and cool, but how we should have opportunities for people to engage with us. And so looking at identifying vacant storefronts or maybe facilities that our partners might have, or even public facilities that we can use for pop-ups over the course of 2022. So people have a place to come and talk about We Will Chicago and learn about We Will Chicago. And again, the focus here is this education and accessibility of this message. Another thought here, going to the digital realm, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Ask Me Anything format, popularized by a website called Reddit, but just creating Ask Me Anything sessions with either community partners, with members of the consultant team, with folks at DPD, where members of the public are invited to ask questions. What is We Will Chicago? How will it affect me? And again, this is very much, first of all, it's a great engagement and conversation and dialogue tool, but just doing this is a manifestation of transparency. I'm sorry about the timing there. Other tactics during this phase is all these tools that we develop, making sure that our sister agencies and any organizations with delegates, for instance, CPS with the local school councils or CDOT with their project teams, that all of these agencies are equipped with these tools so that they can disseminate that through those tools and equip those people who are engaging with community with those tools. The second thing is looking for having conversations with the Chicago Public Library, with city colleges, with the Chicago History Museum to develop plan and pillar themed short and long-term programming. Maybe we work with the Chicago Public Library and do a kids reading program, or maybe we have an exhibit or something at the Chicago History Museum, but having conversations with these institutions in our city to see what we can do to further, I don't know if it's concretized, but just do some programming, some more integrated presence of We Will Chicago. And then in the spirit of these pop-ups, I think, and I think Gabby said this a little bit earlier with the tablets and whatnot, identifying along with those pop-ups and other things, how are we going to collect information? Where are we going to put people? Are we going to use tablets? Just figuring that out in this early part of next year. Also in this phase, reaching out to folks who amplify voices, be it social media influencers, content creators, journalists, particularly journalists reaching different segments of our community to start talking to them about We Will Chicago, develop those relationships and kind of lay down those tracks, so that when we want to amplify the message and talk more about We Will Chicago and really kind of celebrate later on in the year, those relationships are built. There's also a thought around developing an editorial piece around historical reckoning, because it is such an important part of this process, this idea of trust building and equity and all of that. And so why not maybe perhaps pitch a piece and partner with a publisher and in the Black or Latino community to write a piece on historical reckoning. Okay. And then finally, I know it's a lot of information, as Skylar said, so you will be provided with these slides, and certainly we'll have an opportunity to dialogue momentarily at all of these ideas. Then it's all right, now it's time to kind of build the broad awareness, get out there, really, connect with the public. And so In this phase, same, I talked about this like digital signage campaign. So same thing, we'll have this campaign going, but now at this point, we shift the message to getting input or to announcing where the plan is at. So again, you see that shift from like educating to now take action. We can continue this idea of having these pillar themed pop-up stations. So maybe like, you know, we do something at Union Station around transportation and infrastructure, partner with the MCA to do something around arts and culture, where we're engaging the public again, but doing so in a thematic way that's aligned with the plan. Needless to say, presence at major cultural and sports events, whether that be making sure that there's an announcement about We Will Chicago, signage about We Will Chicago. We're actually activating a street team to man some booths and engage people, you know, at the event. Other tactics in this phase, I think, you know, we could do a lot with posters, you know, putting posters in coffee shops and community centers. And, you know, obviously we've all seen QR codes, they're everywhere, but yes, they're good, you know, because people can easily scan them, answer a question, engage with us in some way. So, you know, printing out a bunch of posters, further distributing or further creating points of access and kind of like dialogue and hearing from the public. Also in this phase, reaching out to the business community, as we've spoken about, they're an audience that we really want to kind of connect with a little bit further, be it the Economic Club, the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Urban League, whatever, and starting to schedule presentations and conversations and panel discussions around We Will Chicago. And then another thought, and this is, you know, kind of an idea for our discussion, is maybe like an art show. You know, who doesn't love art, and like young people involved in creating art, and it would be really great to perhaps like challenge students to create some art inspired by We Will Chicago, and maybe have a showing of their art to coincide with some of the major milestones of the process. In the spirit of art, there's been a lot of interesting examples across cities, and I'd be happy to share some links of interactive installations, someplace that people want to see because it's beautiful, but you could also take this opportunity to contribute, to add something. And if it's digital, it might be just that we see people's input populating live, and so we see all of our voices coming, you know, together. Or if it's physical, people come to this place and they drop a line, they add something to it. So then again, we have this like visual artistic manifestation of all of our voices coming together. And then a low-hanging fruit, we have all these like street light banners all over the city, using that infrastructure that's accessible to us to generate awareness on We Will Chicago. Other big ideas, and I promise this is the last set. We thought about the idea of maybe creating a book of a We Will Chicago book. Is anybody who's traveled through bookstores, particularly at the airport, might have books on like experiencing cities, and you know, also books afford us an opportunity to plant in the minds of the future generations the idea of planning and why it's important, and that together we can work to change our city. So the thought was partner with an illustrator, or maybe do some sort of collaborative project either with schools or whoever to write a book on We Will Chicago. So we have this sustainable long-term piece that again inspires future generations. In that spirit, also the idea of creating a We Will Chicago song. You know, who doesn't love music, and something that connects with us emotionally, which helps us remember. But either partnering with a Chicago-based artist or launching a competition for local artists and musicians, where we try to find a song that embodies the spirit of We Will Chicago. And you know, one thing is like prize money if we do competition style, but the other thing is like if the song is selected, it's played wherever we can play it. And again, we have this like long-term artifact, a cultural artifact that plants this We Will Chicago long-term. Other ideas in this spirit, commissioning a mural around We Will Chicago. There's many beautiful murals around the city. Perhaps we do 7 all across our city's neighborhoods that are pillar themed. Make it something that people want to visit. It invites them to visit our different neighborhoods across the city. The second thought is create a We Will Chicago store, an online store where people can buy face masks, t-shirts, posters, etc. And dollars raised through that store, or maybe little micro grants that we give to community organizations if they wanted to like, you know, do projects that are aligned with the plan. And then finally, something big like a citywide scavenger hunt. Again, engaging the city, getting people to move around, visit each other's neighborhoods, but in the spirit of We Will Chicago, so we create this awareness about the plan. So in summary, right, first thing, prepare, make sure we're aligned, make sure we're simple, make sure we're accessible. Second, make sure that people know what this plan is, that it exists and what it means. Third, build broad awareness, engage people, get input, celebrate the plan, and then other big ideas to help us concretize over time. I'm done. Any questions or thoughts, reactions? I'll take a moment to look at the chat now.
Yeah, I just want to name, because I know it's coming up in some earlier comments, that much of what Melissa is presenting here is a menu. And as Gabby had noted, we do not have the time or the people to do everything that's here. So we appreciate this moment, particularly in thinking about the big wild ideas of like, if these are all of the pathways that the city can explore, we want feedback from you during this Q&A that we're just about to launch for the remainder of this meeting. What are the highest priority things that we should talk about? And then drawing the thread from our earlier conversation, we know that we still need to do more, not just in citywide outreach to every single neighborhood to make sure as many residents as possible are engaged in the process and know that We Will is happening and that they can shape it, but also that we know that there are specific identities and geographies that have not been as engaged in the process. And so naming some of those identities from earlier, how then might we, what do we need to do that are more targeted, specific tactics that tie to engaging those populations that have not traditionally been engaged in planning processes. So naming, people with disabilities, naming those that are unhoused, and appreciate all of the other notes that folks are dropping in the chat. That's the very purpose of our conversation with you, which Courtney is about to launch us into. How do we make that tie? Like, how do we think about designing our engagement in phase 3 with your input today in ways that will meet some of those needs?
Just a couple questions around co-design and compensation. I was wondering, one, especially for those groups that we are noticing are less represented in the community engagement. People with disabilities has been one that has been mentioned several times. I saw also LGBTQ population, CHA residents. I was wondering, how are we thinking about co-designing the engagement with them and having a group maybe of leaders in those communities inform and lead what the strategy should be, and for us to follow the recommendations? And connected to that issue, a lot of the members of those groups, as you all know, are have been systematically discriminated, systematically excluded, and are more stressed out than the average citizen and have less money than the average citizen. So I also thinking about how are we thinking about compensating members of those populations for the time and the effort they're going to put, not only the ones thinking about the strategy, but the ones showing up and spending time that, again, is very much in need for them, precisely because we have excluded them for a long time. So those two questions. And then one idea to offer in the menu is that we have one asset in Chicago that is used by a lot of people and in which a lot of us spend a lot of time waiting, unfortunately, sometimes, which is the CTA. And I was wondering if it would be possible to use the train stations, the trains themselves, the buses, metro stations, all those places where we congregate and we spend time, and sometimes we have an opportunity to either read or participate in something or look at our phone, to leverage that infrastructure and that partner and try to reach out people throughout the city, because fortunately we have representation of CTA stations and buses everywhere into the process.
Thank you, Roberto. And there's such rich comments and conversation happening in the chat. So I recommend, if you haven't had a chance, take a look at that. We are also of course, taking notes from the conversation and incorporating any recommendations in the chat. And we'll either put those into action or bring them back with answers depending on what they are. All right, so there are two specific questions we want to get your input on, but it doesn't mean we've closed the door on general reactions to the tactics and strategies proposed. As Skylar mentioned, it is a bit of a menu, so I was glad to see in the chat there's some that people are particularly excited by. I appreciate that Melissa and her team are so thoughtful about what are the types of things that you kind of have to do, and then what are some really creative and boundary pushing ways. The murals, I think, was something that resonated with some people in the chat. So the two questions we specifically want to discuss with you are here on this slide. They are, what are some of the measures of success that we could identify, and what might the barriers be that we need to overcome for the groups that we've specifically identified and named where we need to do better. So I am going to transition over to Mentimeter so we can see all of the ideas in one place and use those as an aid for discussion. But if you want to go ahead and start thinking about these two questions while I make that transition, feel free. And Allie put in the chat the ultimate instructions, which is if you could, in another tab or on another device, go to menti.com and type in the code 20491254. That's the way to directly participate in the Menti, but let me get set up for that. The code again is 20491254 on the website menti.com. So what are the measures of success we should identify for phase 3, which will be the broadest engagement to date for the process? And based on the information shared about identified gaps, based on the ideas Melissa presented in terms of tactics and strategies, whether these are measures of success you've used yourself or have seen elsewhere, or just completely made up. We know this group has a lot of great ideas, and we want to mine that to make sure we are measuring success in the right way. I see a comment about outcomes. I was in a call recently. I think it was Travis who helped us think about the difference between outcomes and impact. The statement about, can people see that their input directly resulted in impact? So I think the nuances of some of that language is really important for us to understand and agree on. And I think each component is important. What are our expected outcomes? What could we perhaps even think about in terms of demonstrating impact? I see a call here for some urgency around, okay, we've named the groups, so what are we going to do about it? I think that's a fair point on accountability, especially as we design, not only bigger in terms of the breadth, but also the number and types of activities we do. Reaching key institutions, role of city council, that it's more than just the number of people engaged, but kind of the level of effort, quality. Anybody see something here that piqued their interest, either that they want to sort of second or they have questions about? Overhearing people on the street talking about We Will. That's pretty amazing. I would love that too. Or Kathy one, Sebastian Schuyler, if there's something I missed from the chat that we could take this moment to answer, or if any of you have a reaction to what's being shared here. There's a lot of fantastic ideas.
This is Kathy, and I would just say that there are a lot of ideas, and list them. Todd and I have been meeting with different individuals in different departments, just like what does your work plan look like next year, especially when it comes to, we call them delegate agencies, but different departments work with different groups. So we started that with CDOT, DFSS, our own internal DOH, but I'm seeing we haven't finished, but I think we need to do the same with CTA, libraries, actually some of the museums, CHA, so that we can get an idea of how to start working with the groups that the other agencies are working with as well, and try to get to some of these questions. Also, MOPD, and also good input. Thank you for the idea of reaching people who are incarcerated to the public defender's office or the program coordinators. And I saw some other things in the chat I didn't write down, but these are all really, really good avenues for us to start those conversations and get people teed up for next year.
Yeah, I think echoing, what I'm seeing is both like feedback on the general sort of broad outreach to, reach as many people as possible, and then people naming specific groups that need to be engaged, and then saying like we need targeted strategies to engage those groups. And so would love, feedback through the Menti or in the chat on ways we can, really meet disabled people, incarcerated people, homeless people. Those are just a couple that were named in the Menti up here. Just identifying, I'm seeing a lot around compensation, echoing a lot of what Roberto had noted of, what does it look like to engage with those communities in ways in which they're sort of co-designing and co-facilitating those conversations, very similar to our model for community partners this go around. What that might look like for us into next year to get engagement for populations that we know may not be represented so far as deeply as others.
Yeah, just another kind of angle on that. I think it was when we were talking with DFSS, and they have a variety of really large to very specific or small organizations that to be reached. But one idea was they're providing meals at senior centers and they have staff there. And how can we work with their staff to provide, let's just say, a survey at those forums? So the more we can know about, organizations that are already working in places, and we can kind of tap into that. That'll be the most effective way forward for us to reach targeted populations and working with our partners, which are all of you and more.
I love these aspirational ones of like people come to us to ask, hey, how can I get involved, versus us going to them. That's amazing. I love that vision. People talking about We Will Chicago on the street. Love it. Anything you're seeing, Juan Sebastian?
I don't know if this has come up in the Menti, but I know that I felt like there was a good, rich thread of comments around mailing surveys or how to do in-person engagement in the chat earlier, which I thought which stood out to me.
And similarly, just better tracking anytime we're out talking to people, I think is something we came through today loud and clear. We may expand the demographics collected so that we can quantitatively report out, measure progress, and hopefully turns out that it's measuring success, right? Not just measuring what happened. And it was shared today, the kind of collective effort with public information officers of various departments, getting delegate agencies on board. The library has been a good partner with artist organizer outreach and even their own, the One Book, One Chicago program had sort of a planning theme recently. So I think these conversations are starting to happen, and now it's kind of a critical point to catalyze some of that by strategically choosing some of the tactics and strategies that Melissa shared.
And just a quick update on the public information officers, as Gabby said, they were very helpful in pushing out the survey. And Gabby and I and Kevin, also in our department, have we're just talking about the agenda for the PIOs for next Tuesday, and we can also share some of this with them as well. And we will continue to work with them again with all these existing channels that just keep funneling out.
Courtney, I just wanted to mention that we have created a We Will Chicago brochure, which is a nice kind of overview of what the program is. So far, we have printed copies in English and Spanish, and we have additionally had it translated into Arabic, simplified Chinese, Urdu, Hindi, Korean, and Polish. So if there are additional languages that you think that we need to include, please let us know. We can submit those for translation, as well as we can also print additional brochure copies in those languages if you have locations that you would like to see them distributed at, or that you're able to help us distribute them. The Chicago Public Library did partner with us, and so you should see these brochures in every single of the 88 public libraries in Chicago. So please let us know if you see a library that doesn't have them out, and we'll try to follow up with them on that.
Thank you, Gabby. I think the other thing to tie a few of these things together is measuring success and thinking about how many of the tactics we can elevate on the spectrum. So, there's, I think, trying to hit different points on the spectrum so that you've done every type, but there's also an opportunity to think about with some of the tactics, can we kind of elevate them, move them up on the spectrum to get closer to ownership. Ellen had a question. Can you please talk more about how the activities that Melissa mentioned are being coordinated with decision-making points in the planning process and how the input is informing the pillar groups discussions? So as you're aware, this phase 2 process has been extended. So in the new year, the pillar research teams will begin taking the guiding questions and the objectives and turning it into the policy framework. So that will happen during their meetings over the first quarter of 2022. They will be back in April to report to you guys about that. And so the tactics and strategies that Melissa shared are phase 3. So it doesn't mean, I would say, that there's necessarily a hard start. We're trying to position certain things to get ready for that. But the kind of phase 2 versus phase 3 distinction, I think, is important there. I don't know if Kathy, you wanted to add anything else to that, or Gabby.
Yeah, this is Kathy. I would say a couple things about that. A lot of what we talked about with Melissa is getting ready for disseminating and getting all kinds of feedback on the work that the research teams have been doing, which is deep engagement. And granted that we do have gaps, which we will start trying to reach more specifically during the, let's just say, the first half of next year. By the June, the goal is to have a draft of the policy framework, policy plan that we want to, again, make accessible to people in language and level of detail, and really do a lot of what I think maybe getting deeper into Melissa's list of tactics for the second half of next year. So we're going to be doing smaller types of work, focusing on groups in the first half as these objectives and ideas to get, we want reaction to, and much broader and the second half of the year, because by then we'll have just a lot more content for people to react to. So we'll be looking for, validating the kinds of work that's come out of the research teams and the advisory committee, but also hopefully surfacing anything that may have been missed, or voices that may have been missed, or issues, so that we're trying to get as much as we can. We'll have more on exactly.
Maybe just,
go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to put a finer point on it, think of phase 3 as envisioning the most engaging public comment period you have ever seen, right? So what might we do that takes a lot of the draft work that the research teams are putting forward, it's the policy framework, as Courtney noted, but use that as a baseline for much richer, deep conversations in community to ask, what are we getting wrong about this? What are we getting right about this? How does this align with your vision for Chicago, with your vision for your neighborhood? Taking all of that data and synthesizing it to then make final revisions for the framework itself, for then proposal to the Plan Commission in 2023. So that is the link back to the actual document itself.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next Menti question. I appreciate all of these, and we will digest them, synthesize them, and share them. And I know some of this came through in the chat, but I appreciate everyone's focus on that it can't just be broad and that we need to do something very specific and intentional about the gaps we've identified. So with that in mind, we'd like to hear your ideas on those barriers and even suggestions on how to overcome them. I know there's some in that spirit overlap with the previous question, but specifically, we want to take the time to know the barriers so that we can overcome them and or avoid them. Now I'm like, are people still thinking or, oh, there we go. Something's wrong with the technology. All right, thank you to whoever went first. I see lack of trust twice. I think that's a big one. I was even thinking of that in the context of asking people personal information, right? I mean, willingness to share doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. Extend beyond our comfort zones and norms. Lack of resources. Doing the work, as Yoda said, do or do not. There is no try or not try. Survey fatigue. I don't see any barriers. We will Chicago vibe already has me in we can do anything mode. Love it. People thinking this is just another campaign.
Courtney, I see in the chat a request to rephrase the question too.
Does rephrase mean repeat out loud, Rosa, or you mean?
I think maybe the question, perhaps for me, might be easier. What are the challenges that we see? What are the challenges we think will help us meet the goals? I think I get the question. I just think maybe it took me a minute to kind of try to get to what we're trying to get at. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks. Other things people notice that they either like or want a second in what's coming up here, things you have questions on. Does not have to be only me talking and narrating. burnout from COVID, perhaps that both life is just more difficult and this has been an extended process, but also the Zoom fatigue. I think there's both of those aspects, but curious to hear from others. You're living in survival mode, hard to think about the future and long-term planning. You're trying to meet basic needs. COVID is still here. People, as people have tried to bring back in-person meetings, keeps reminding us, right, that we're not out of it yet. All right, one more question then, via Menti. This is a different format. Of all of Melissa's tactics and strategies, we created a short list of those that required external collaboration, not just things that perhaps the city could or should do, like contact the media. You know, there's things that are just on a bit of a checklist that we think are important as part of a comprehensive engagement strategy. So here's a short list of tactics that we thought were either bigger, novel, might be more difficult, but some of the ones that met this definition of requiring outside partnership, collaboration. And we'd like you to take a minute to rank these so we can get an indication of, if we have to start to pick and choose of the bigger ones, which ones are the most important to you. And this isn't, you know, a referendum or an official poll, just a way to gauge interest. And so if you have questions or want to make comments or even influence voting, I think that's okay under these circumstances. So you can come off mute and ask a question or make a comment. Appreciate everyone's willingness to participate, not only with Menti, but in the chat. There's so much in there for us to use. We will make sure to do that and report back on anything that was an open question that we didn't have answers to today. So look like there's still a little bit of jockeying. I love seeing the sliders move around as people enter their answers. Give a couple more minutes and then share some preliminary results, and then we can close out for the day. So the dissemination through delegates still coming in strong. Partnering with cultural and educational institutions on installations and programming, and neighborhood pop-ups and pillar-specific pop-ups. All right, we will share all of this with you in addition to the slides. Just checking the chat real quick. Thank you everyone for the comments there. Thanks, Ellen. Let's see. In terms of closeout, switching back to the good old PowerPoint.
Yeah, I love Isabel, that comment around the challenge of QR codes and like in general, maybe the challenge that we're having in collecting exit survey data. Would love if anyone has had a lot of success in that in your community engagement in terms of actually driving folks to complete that so that we can get some information about the identities of people that we're engaging and that we're not. Would love to hear any learnings either on the call now, if you want to off mute, put it in the chat, or offline. That's definitely an area of growth for us for next year.
I think just tying it, the QR code thing to engagement, I think people will only do it if they know that there's compensation. I think that's, yeah. Personally, I just think QR codes are a little overhyped as a marketing tool. Like most ads you're forced to see, but a QR code you have to take your own initiative to engage with, and I don't think that it's particularly effective. But that's just my own personal complaint.
I'm kind of surprised they're still around. I feel like the COVID restaurant menu thing like gave them a second chance on life.
I do also want to elevate that, you know, we can acknowledge with the last survey that we did, that open-ended responses, I think, are not ideal for mass survey experiences. They're just very complex in terms of on the side of both the city and our consultants for analyzing the data, and then also it takes a lot of time and effort, and we really greatly appreciated everyone who took that time and effort to fill out those surveys. But we did also hear some good feedback that they were perhaps a little too dense. You know, the questions were verging on jargony, and you know, we are going into this next phase really trying to rethink simplifying the language, not to the point where we're losing the intentionality of the questions, but simplifying them to be the most accessible that they can be for some of these bigger issues that we really want to collect quantitative data on. So as Kathy kind of mentioned, I think we're going to move towards some kind of ranking of choices, a little bit more kind of yes or no answers, you know, scale questions as well. Melissa had the great idea of purchasing these large number of tablets to use at in-person events going forward, so that people don't even need to have cell phones there, and you know, they could even have somebody assisting them with filling it out. And I do, you know, take to heart the conversation we had earlier about getting more demographic data on here, and you know, specifically about disability. So you know, we will make sure to kind of incorporate that much on a much more granular scale going forward.
So we want to thank all of you. I mean, we have some time for questions, but this has been really great for looking at the both, right? The gaps that we have and deep engagement that we need to do. And Katya and Juana, thank you. We're going to hit you up for your like willingness to help take on the area in the violence prevention and outreach gap and people impacted there. Ellen, we do need to sit down with you about, you know, different avenues at the CHA, and of course, Commissioner Arthur, we need to follow up with you among others that were mentioned here. So we'll be following up specifically just to kind of get some more direction on getting to these specific gaps and the processes are the best ways to do that. And then thanks for the Mente work, because that's going to help us with this broader engagement that we want to really sort of let loose, let's just say, next year, mid next year. So this has been great. Are there other questions, general, that anyone would like to raise or in the last couple of minutes? No other questions? Could it be that you all want another 5 minutes in your day?
I also know this was a lot of information, so we're going to share with you all of those maps, all of those stat slides. There'll be an index that has the list of all the full community partners, if that jogs some new ideas. And then I will note, you know, Melissa, what she presented in that amazing menu. Would love this to be a conversation that we keep going through the holidays into next year. So if you're, you know, in the shower, eating breakfast, a random idea comes up of what we can do differently next year, this is a formative time for us to be scoping that engagement plan. So we appreciate all of your feedback today and all the future feedback that will come. And we'll update you in future meetings next year on where we have landed based on some of your recommendations today in the full scale of both deep and broad engagement in 2022.
Yeah, they just keep coming. Rosa, we'll see where we can put the videos. We've talked about videos. We'll have to have some criteria on that, like can't be too long. So, but all of this is great, and we are going to try to integrate it all, or integrate, let's say, the diversity. We probably won't be able to do it all, but we'll do our best. And we'll be back with you on that. All right, well.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to hang
Thank you all.
if you want to chat or have some questions. We'll stay on the line, but happy holidays, everyone. We appreciate you. Thank you for all your work so far. See you next year.